Welcome to my studio. Um, thank you for being with us today, dear poet Meg Kearney. And
Thank you.
uh, I think we have been doing this for last almost 10 years, and most recently I have done my professor's interview from India. She joined us through Zoom. But today, it is a wonderful opportunity to have you here. And so I start with, as I start your bio, prior to that, I just want to say a few things about my first encounter with you, which was so heartwarming that I thought at that moment, I want to interview her. I decided at that moment. And part of the reason was your last name. I am fascinated by Irish authors. I have a very dear friend in Trinity College Dublin. She
Mm.
invited me twice. I went there to talk about my books, two books, and Molly Malone. Everybody knows about that song. I don't know if everybody knows about that song, but your last name resonated so beautifully that I need to see her, I need to meet her, and I need to read her works. When I, heard you were such an eminent poet and you came to LaSalle and as a director or the founding director of the Solstice MFA program. But you were very kind. In your tea appointment, you told me that, oh, I'm adopted. And I felt at that moment, perhaps I have offended her by asking, about her last name. But then I happened to see some of your interviews and I figured out that you were so vocal, you were so articulate, you were so spontaneous about sharing your story with all of us. So, so we'll talk about it. So apart from that, I have a few more things to talk about you, which is that your first, not your first book, this is one of your latest book, which got the Washington Award. So I will just give a little bit of a formal introduction talking about it, that um, the book was published by the Word Works Press and it won the prize, Washington Prize in 2020 for poetry, of course, which made small press distribution poetry bestseller list through September 2021. But apart from that, I did some, reading of your works, and I found out about your three novels, which are written in verse, and your picture book, and also your fascination, your love, compassion for animals. So, with that note, let us start. And so I was enchanted also by your book, reading the first, not the first, that's the second poem, Crow. And honestly, when I was reading the poem Crow, I did not look at your interview when you revealed about your, you know, parents who adopted you and that you were in the foster care for 2 months and then 2 years. So that's why you had difficulty finding your birth certificate, which brought tears in my eyes. But prior to that, I read the poem Crow, and I was noting certain sections. And I'm going to ask you a few questions about it, then I'll let you talk about the poem and give us the dissertation. So, in that poem, you talk about your mother, your sister, and it's it seems like she was in a convent, and then you talk about her journey. She came to New York and the way she made all the way to find her daughter, And then her husband told her that, yes, she's somewhere there and this will give her life. But finally, what drew my attention most was the last line or the expression, the flew. She flew. How did she get here? By flying. And that is so typical and such a significant metaphor that is used in Indian poetry. And I think there is a sect, they're singing minstrels, they're called bowls. And these bowl poets, they have this metaphor of the bird, and they talk about how, bird represents the human soul, human psyche, which again connected to your last poem, Sparrow. I loved that poem. So let's talk about how, that you're describing that, I'll just read the last line from Sparrow. When you're saying that, lower my dust into the ground, may a host of sparrows bathe with me. May we fling that fresh earth skyward, then lift our faces as it rains back down. So you can see here, you are connecting the earth with the heaven. This kind of connection is very much prevalent in that mystic poetry, bowl poetry it is called. So I think I should stop now. I want to hear your recitation of the poem Crow and Sparrow, and also your thoughts about these two specific poems.
Yeah, let me start by reading Sparrow, which is the last poem in the book.
Yes.
But Crow is, of course, the longest poem in the book. It appears, I want to say, as the fourth poem in. And it takes about 8 minutes to read the whole thing. So maybe I'll just read like the first few sections of Crow. But let me start with Sparrow.
Yeah, wonderful.
And as you probably have figured out, the book All Morning the Crows, it's made up of poems, and each title is the name of a different bird.
Yes.
So Sparrow is where we end, and it has a epigraph from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology that says the house sparrow takes frequent dust baths. It throws soil and dust over its body feathers just as if it were bathing with water.
Mm-hmm.
Sparrow. Saint Bede says the soul is a sparrow. It flits in one door, flutters down a hall, disappears out another door. A brownish black, soon forgotten flash. Sparrow. The word itself from the Anglo-Saxon means a flutterer. To flutter is to float. Sparrow on waves, sparrow on a pond. Or flutter is to contract, to beat irregularly. Sparrow in my heart. Or to tremble with excitement, I could barely contain my sparrow. If water flutters, there's more than a ripple. This morning, a sparrow splashes in the garden dirt like a baby in the tub. A soul, perhaps, celebrating its former body returned, as promised, to dust. Oh, my very being wants to believe, but my faith, that sparrow, flutters. So when my grave's been dug, when they lower my dust into the ground, may a host of sparrows bathe with me. May we fling that fresh earth skyward, then lift our faces as it rains back down. So I love the fact that you mentioned that in India, there's a connection, a spiritual connection between the bird and metaphor and the poet, as it seems that Saint Bede had the same kind of idea. So that might be a cross-cultural
Cross-cultural. Yeah.
idea. Yeah. Especially when it comes to the sparrow. So yeah, so Crow is it's in 24 very short sections, and each section is marked off with a little asterisk. So I just will briefly pause between each one, and I'm just going to read maybe the first 5 or 6 of these opening sections. Crow. It was a crow first taught me how to pry a thing open, snatch a stick to leverage a headstone, or widen the hole in a rotten pine's trunk to get at the story inside. New York, 1999. If our mother had kept you, my newly found sister said, you'd never have gone to college, wouldn't have done a lot of things you've done. Ornithologists claim crows have an innate sense of fairness. One will scoff at your proffered raisin, for example, if you've given her sister 2 peanuts. If you've given her sister away, that's a fact best kept cached, like the crow's scraps of roadkill and white oak acorns. I wasn't the first apprentice to the crow, first to learn that old term crowbar, handy for getting at grubs and slugs or warding off a man with a brick for a fist. Flip the bar around to hook a beetle, but not a mother, not a sister. If she had kept me? A rooster crows, crows caw. Explain that, and while you're at it, how you came to laugh my mother's laugh, my newly found sister said. I said, I never claimed to be anyone's interpreter. She said, our. I meant to say, our mother. Rhode Island, 1960. Hear that? Crows are songbirds too, squawked the nuns in their choir loft. See the one with the little silver cross in her beak, jimmying the blue gold window's latch? That's her, my first mother. I'll stop there, at least for now.
Okay. So this, I think this poem drew me very much into the book. And so may I continue asking some questions on this poem?
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I have written down a lot. I wrote on this poem, my interpretation. So who is this sister? Is this your, can I ask you, who is the sister? And you sometimes mention my newfound sister.
Right. She's always identified as my newly found sister.
But why so?
So it in that one, the second stanza, 1999, New York, 1999, my newly found sister. That's where you first hear that term in the poem. That is when I actually found a sister and brother that I didn't know that I had. I spent 8 years searching for my birth mother, my first mother. And by the time I found her and blood relatives in 1999, I learned that she had actually died of breast cancer in 1983. But I discovered this brother and sister in Oregon. I'm, of course, on the East Coast. Brother, sister in Oregon. So, you know, when she gave me up for adoption, some months later, she escaped, she flew across the country and started her life over again in Arizona. And then eventually there was an Oregon connection too. But yeah, so that's why the newly found sister in 1999, I don't talk about my newly found brother. It was enough just to introduce the one.
The sister. So now, if I have not read the entire book, or if you have not told me I'm adopted, I'm not sure if I would be able to understand the subtext. This is in compliment because the poem is written enveloped with such beautiful imagery and metaphor that it could be interpreted otherwise, symbolically. So my question is, where from? I mean, did you follow any specific poet, or, of course, the Albatross, we know that Coleridge, Wordsworth, Shelley, Keats, all of them used, Nightingale, Albatross, or other birds. So how did you choose to write in this kind of metaphoric way through birds? So in other words, how the craft is so skilled, so beautifully done, that so they are real poems. They are not like didactic poems, or you intended to write some message, you are using the bird imagery. It's very organic and very spontaneous. So I want to know that how you mastered that skill. Who was the inspiration? Which poet? Or is it completely spontaneous?
Well, I think, every poet who's writing is constantly reading, other poets, whether they're poets who lived hundreds of years ago or our contemporaries. And I think all of them influence us. And, there's certain poets that you feel like you're in conversation with, as you write. But this particular book, I actually just, I love a good prompt. I love, I think one of the most challenging things for a poet is that we're constantly facing the blank page, right? Like your poems, even if we work on them for months or years, I'm working on more than one at a time. And unlike a prose writer who might be working on, a novel that's a few hundred pages, and when you pick up to continue writing, you've got something there, right? To like, okay, here's the last couple pages I wrote, let me continue. Whereas a poet is always starting with nothing, right? That blank
Yep.
page. That's the hardest part.
Yeah.
Always looking for something, to get me going. And so for this particular book, I had heard about a collection called 100 Birds and How They Got Their Names.
Diana Wells, right? Yeah.
Anna Wells, right.
You
So
wrote, yeah, in your
yeah,
preface.
and that was my huge prompt. I actually, so in the book, each of the 100 birds that she talks about has maybe a little 2-page spread with a pencil sketch. And you learn things about birds that you never would in a guide, right? Not just how each bird got its name, but all kinds of strange little historical things or facts about birds. So I thought, all right, I'm going to just read each of these descriptions. I'll starting with albatross, right?
Yeah.
And just I'll read it, and then I'll go to with my pencil and paper and start writing and see what happens.
Yes.
So I wrote 100 poems in that way.
Okay.
And drafted them and set them aside, and then ended up, coming back, and I threw out more than half of them, as we do, and then just started working on the ones that seemed to have the most potential. But Crow was one of the last ones that I was really able to nail down. It took me a long time
Yeah.
to come to the place where I was ready to write that poem.
Yeah, it reminded me of this poet's comment that poetry is thought recollected in tranquility.
Yes, Wordsworth.
What's
Mhm.
And so some of the titles were so attractive to me, like for example, Albatross, Rime of the Ancient Mariner. So now your other poems like Duckling Swan, no, there's some other poems like Goldfinch. Book is divided into 4 sections. And it seemed that, so I studied deeply the poems in the first section. So I have a few more questions for you. So reading Duckling Swan and Goldfinch and some other poems, it also seemed to me that it's not, your theme is not just focusing on your, being an adopted child, but also in general, human society,
Yeah.
critique of society, women's empowerment, and women being subjected to patriarchy. Am I reading it correctly? So
Yeah.
it seems like it comes back. It starts with the morning in Crow, but then it comes back. So I want to hear about it. Also, I want to mention that I was very much caught by the title of the poem Ibis, because I know, again, I'm very fond of the Irish authors. I think James Joyce in Portrait of the Artist as a young man uses, is the god of writing, thought, etc. So, but in your poem, you do not support Ibis. There's a negative tone. So I was curious about it. Why, so these two sets of questions.
Yeah, there's a lot of kind of, women in trouble in these poems, or, women up against, as you say, the patriarchy. And Ibis is certainly exploring that. You want me to read Ibis? I'll read
Yeah,
Ibis.
I
Yeah.
loved it.
Quick here. It's early on. So I'll mention Thoth. Thoth is the Egyptian god of wisdom and learning.
Wisdom. Yeah.
And he was said to have the body of a man and the head of an ibis.
Yeah,
And also that he that ibises are said to croak like ravens, which I thought was an interesting kind of crossover tidbit, So Ibis. Her first mistake was trusting a god with the body of a man and the head of an ibis. People said he was old and bald and croaked like a raven, desired only shrimp and flies. But no, he was fine and smelled of salt. He knew her names, the one she was born with and the one she was given. Knowledge, he said, is a pond awake with fish. When he stripped her on its mossy bank and lured her in, she understood. Lily pads tangled around their knees. Her body was a map his hands had drawn. Beyond clear blue sky, she saw the moon full and stars and their constellations. If only she'd been satisfied. Instead, she tugged at his arm, insisting. For wisdom, he had to carry her to shore, lay her down. She imagined the earth would open, reveal its golden center. But his bill was sharp. She thought he would be gentle. Yet with each peck, he drove her deeper, deeper, until she knew he had never truly been a wading bird or bastard child. He was God of a heaven where all the angels' bodies are broken.
Why so? Why the angels' bodies? Why do you think? Yes, can you explain a little bit more?
I don't know if I can, I think if there was any other way to say what the poem is saying, that then you don't have to write a poem about it, you know?
So
I think sometimes that, poems are mysterious
mystical.
to us, and you kind of understand something more emotionally than you do intellectually. Um, and that certainly is the case for me here.
Mhm. Yeah. So, yeah, thank you. Also, I another question came up, but I had given you another question. No. Okay. The next question that is coming up on my mind, and I pondered about it, is that you sometimes it seems you're mourning, right? The loss of your birth mother, or not being connected, at the time, when she gave you up for adoption, etc. But this sense of mourning is, remember when we had correspondence once, I mentioned one Indian poet and who uses a lot of bird imagery, and you said, oh, his birthday, Jibanananda Das, is similar to my grandfather's birthday. So I'm referring to that poet. He's a very famous poet, Jibanananda Das, in his book called Ruposhi Bangla, meaning Bengal the Beautiful. He is talking about all these birds, and he's using that bird imagery to mourn about his country, which is undivided India. There was the partition of India,
Yeah.
and after the partition, when he came back to this side of, which is now the other side became Bangladesh. Now it was West Pakistan, became Bangladesh, and the Hindu Bengalis, they had to migrate to Calcutta, this side, you know, so West Bengal. And so he could never adjust to that diasporic dislocation, I call it. So his poetry full of beautiful imagery, this called in the Bengali language, gang chil, which is eagle, and swan, ducks, peacocks, so many beautiful birds, and through which he is expressing his loss, his sadness. And so I found a good parallel that you're mourning, not all the time, but majority of the time you're mourning your mother, not having been able to in contact with your birth mother immediately, or why she gave you up. So that mourning is so similar to your mourning. He's so motherland, he's mourning the motherland. And also, I remember in this, you must know that Jamaica Kincaid also, at the bottom of the river, I teach in my classes, autobiography of my mother. So the first line is that my mother gave me up the moment I was born. So all this poet and Kincaid, they all came to my mind reading your book. So any thought or comment on that?
Um, so many of us have explored um through bird metaphors and otherwise, the mother, whether it's the motherland or our mothers. It's just one of those, it's such a innate deep connection that we have
Mhm,
with this first person who carried us in her womb, that, you
mhm.
know, I find myself always kind of, returning to that place, um, and you're always kind of grasping like for ways to kind of put words to feeling, and birds often give us kind of a metaphor
Yeah,
that we need to do
metaphor for
that.
that. Yeah. So it's so interesting that you mentioned the word I don't want to make it too intellectual, theoretical, but I can't help mentioning this British Australian feminist philosopher, Teresa Brannan, who has a theory of, the mother-daughter or mother-child relationship, that she says that theory of original logic, the one need to go back to the mother's womb. But that's not possible. There's a symbolic connection, and that she compares with this, this commodification of society, this, like she says that when you are born, it's a stage of hallucination or imitation. And to undo that, you need to go back and reconnect with your mother, or go back to the womb, or what it means that you have to connect with the mother, or at another plane to connect with nature. So birds are part of nature. So yeah, I see that you did such a wonderful job. But not all your books are on birds, right? Or this is the one you dedicated primarily to birds.
I have in my poems often birds appear, like from my very first book. So All Morning the Crows is book number 8. So book number 1 was actually called An Unkindness of Ravens.
Oh yeah.
And there's a middle section in the book that's all kind of
Do you want to talk? Do you want to
inspired
talk?
by Raven dreams.
Yeah. Do you want to read any poem from that book?
All right. So I actually went my first kind of 30 to 35 years of my life without ever talking about being adopted. It was something that was somewhat of a family secret. My older brother and sister also adopted, and it was something that we didn't speak about outside the 4 walls of the house. So when I started on this first book of poems, I was in graduate school and avoiding that topic of adoption, of having a birth mother. And then finally, I started having these dreams where a raven would be, or more than one raven would be, not threatening, but flying around my head, tugging at my hair, like trying to tell me something. And so I would start writing these dreams down, and that's a really terrific way for poets to get some, a start on a poem, is by
Wow.
using our dreams to launch a poem. So I'll just read one of these. So it became kind of, the raven for me in this first book became kind of a mask where I could speak about adoption in this very veiled way through the raven. So it was like I'm talking about this kind of family taboo subject, but I'm doing it in a way that feels emotionally safe to me because I'm putting on the mask of the raven and using it, through these dreams. So this is just one of those. It's very short. Looks like that. It's called What She Told Me. Sometimes the raven talks in its sleep. Once it said, "Not enough." Once it said, "Oh, mother." Once it caught me hovering over its trembling beak, my ear so close I feared I might fall. It shook my hair from its eyes. We were perched in a tree, and below the city shivered. I could smell the dead the raven had eaten for breakfast. Its back was purple, red, then white. Its back was a room, a chapel, dimly lit, where a woman was crying. I thought I knew her. I almost called her name, but she hurried away, slipping a photograph of me into her pocket.
Thank you. It's so beautiful. And you read it with such beautiful, like each word woke up as you are reading this poem.
Thank you.
And you also mentioned that in the preface of this book, All Morning the Crows, that your mother so loved the birds. And
My mom, my adoptive.
yeah, yes. Do you want to talk about it a little? So were you inspired by her as well?
Very, I mean, I grew up, looking out the dining room window, usually because that overlooked the bird feeder out in the backyard. And mom would be there and I would be at her side and she would have her bird book out, the bird guide. And we would look at the birds and then she would show me, here's the cardinal, here's the blue jay, and she would make little comments like, oh, those blue jays, they're so greedy, things like that. So from a very young age, I had this fascination with birds, but it was also something that I could share with my mom.
With your mom. Yeah, she instilled you. Okay, going back to your previous poem, I got so enchanted by it. It seemed that I heard that people transfer their ideas from dreams into reality by writing, but you are the living example. Somebody telling me you did that. That is amazing. That is amazing. And it's so also, it seems like it takes me back into psychoanalysis that it was so much, buried under your psyche that you had to let it out, right?
Yeah.
And you could not find peace until you did that. So did you feel relieved? So what kind of satisfaction did you derive after you have been able to articulate your emotion into this poem?
Right. That's a great question. Well, some people say, writing poems can be a form of healing. I don't really ascribe to that, but I do think that writing these poems have given me a sense of empowerment. Being the one to tell the story and tell a story that, from the beginning, I never had any control over, so to be able to kind of take the reins and have control over what story I tell, what I include and what I leave out, that at least has given me a real sense of, as I said, empowerment.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I felt that. Like some of the thank you. It is a very nice response, and thank you for opening your heart to me. But I'm also caught by that the rhythm of the birds' names. I know you, of course, you said the prompt was the book, Diana Walsh's book. So may I ask you some of the names about those names? Like, for example, in book 3, um, there's a poem called, no, there's, which section it is, like Bitran, Brackable. The sounds of those, would you tell me about little bit about, so you chose exactly 100 birds' names following Diana Walsh to write these poems, or how did you select
I,
that this theme will resonate with this emotion, etc.?
yeah, I think I ended up, I wrote the 100 poems with the 100 bird names, and then throughout many of them, I think in the book, I ended up with 51 poems, 51 birds in the end. And sometimes that was just a matter of, these are the ones that seem to be working, or seem to be worth continuing to work on, where others just, were just disasters that I just threw away.
Okay.
And then there's a few that I really, I wanted a crow poem in there. I wanted a raven poem in there. And those were, in the end, the hardest ones to write. So sometimes it just had to do with the allure of the bird, and sometimes it had to do with just my kind of determination that I want.
Definition. Now, I also wonder why the raven bothered you in the dream. Why not any other bird?
Good question. We'll have to ask the universe. Some people say that we all have a token animal. So perhaps the raven is my token animal. I do have a pair of ravens who nest nearby here where I live in New Hampshire, and I'm always kind of talking to them.
Yeah, I know you live in Peterborough. We have been there. Oh, it's such a beautiful place.
It's a
Such a beautiful.
beautiful place. Yeah.
That is
And
nice in New England, but I also saw, in the links that you sent me that you are not a part of Thoreau's Walden, because I go there all the time. I used to more,
uh-huh.
not.
Yeah, no, I'm not really part of that, but I've visited there. Yeah, and there's Thoreau is mentioned a few times in the book.
Yes, I saw that too. So I'm not finding those poems. Would you help me read Bitron, Grackle? The sound of those poems attracted me. And
Yep. Bittern is a little too dark. Let's read Grackle.
yeah, yeah, it is.
And actually I make a comment in the Grackle poem about it's just a fun word to say, right?
Yeah, I love that saying that. I was playing with that word.
Yeah. So Grackle.
What is the page number?
It is on page 40.
Okay, I got it.
Grackle. What a grackle is doing perched on the rail of her baby's crib, noiselessly twitching its tail. She doesn't wonder. The way this baby gleams, he's bound to catch a grackle's eye. Besides, birds have flit in and out of these baby dreams forever. Sapsucker, blue jay, sparrow, kingfisher, titmouse. She just likes to say grackle, a crack your knuckles, hard candy word. In the dream, her baby's black as a grackle, meaning when she holds him to the light, he shines, purple and blue, a glittery bronze, silent and nameless. Sometimes he is a she, but always the dream baby is hers. That is the miracle. Nights of nursery rhymes and sorrow, of yellow quilts and songbirds, enough to break a bough, enough to fell a cradle.
Mhm. So, what is the meaning of the poem?
Well, again, it's it's really hard to talk about what poems mean. You could talk more about how they're made and what they do. If there was a way to say it any other way, you wouldn't have to write a poem about it. But there's certainly a sense of this is a childless, the voice of the speaker of the poem is a childless woman who dreams, who has these baby dreams, and the baby dreams are filled with birds as well as
Mm.
the yeah.
So, would you categorize your poem as kind of not exactly mystic, but verging on the mystic plane? Or because you have written poem from a dream, it has to be mystic, but not in the so-called terms. More like, could you call it poetically mystic or poetic mystic, or some kind of not supernatural. Uh, but it's crossing the border, like the
Yeah,
reality
there's a
in between.
speculative kind of element to it for sure. Maybe mystical, I don't know.
Yeah, we can call it mystical. I think not supernatural, but mystical, like some otherworldly touch. When you are trying to connect with your birth mother who is already gone, that has to be otherworldly. And when you're dreaming the raven, and the dream can inspire you, that is, you know. And
Yeah.
yeah, some of the poems, I loved your poem Albatross. I don't know why, but it's so it has an impact on me. It's like I visualize the whole thing. So I hope I understood it correctly. Um,
I'll bet you did. That was another kind of borderline, woman almost in trouble.
yeah, but I was not sure. Almost, but not in trouble, right?
Right.
But they left her to the sea. They didn't bother because she's 15.
Yeah.
So I read it many times. Yeah. Can I have a recitation from you?
Yes, I would love to read
Yeah.
Albatross.
Yeah.
Let's see, that is 42.
Got it.
And of course, I'm giving a wink to Coleridge, right? And his rhyme of it.
Yeah.
Mary.
I love the name always, Albatross, because I used to hear my mom was very fond of that poem. So
Ah,
I got attached to that.
uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay, Albatross. Forget sailors. You never trusted them. Though the one who approached you on the beach spoke to you as if you were a woman. You in the new bikini, none of the boys back home had noticed. He and his friends could have put an end to all that was good in you over behind the boulders at low tide. You sat with them in a circle, playing gin. They smelled of salt and sweat, and you were too flattered to flee, though the constant surf said, leave, leave. When you finally said you were 15, they stared at each other over their cards, and that was the last game. They picked you up, sat you down where they found you by the sea, like a piece of glass that needed more time in the waves before it could be called beautiful. They were good sailors. You had asked if they knew the poem, but when they shook their heads no, you let the story go. Look down at your hearts and spades.
Mhm. Yeah. Oh, such a beautiful poem. Yeah. So you mentioned already it's the woman almost in trouble, but she rescued her on time. So we talked about it a little while ago about this theme of yours about patriarchy, lack of empowerment for women, etc. So um, would you, what is your vision of life? Because in our philosophy, Indian philosophy, it says that poets are the visionaries of the world. So what message do you have for women? And I feel, if I may ask you, I think your mother must have felt herself little wretched as well. And when the children has to be given away, that's not a very happy predicament.
No,
So obviously, it's not just you're mourning that, but you're also addressing some societal problems, critique of society. But you are writing it in a very beautiful aesthetic medium of poetry. So how did you make the connection and what is your vision for women?
I think, for me, it's just telling these stories and sharing these stories because, I mean, when we write, and I'm sure this is how you feel as a writer too, I mean, in part you're writing for yourself, but you also you're writing to connect, and the most rewarding thing for me is when, someone reads a poem of mine and they go, oh, me too. Me too. I didn't know anybody else felt that way. I didn't know like anybody else went through anything like that. And so I always like to think that poetry can be the path to world peace because it's through poems that we all discover, no matter where we live, what part of the world we're in, that we really have more in common than not. And show me a woman in this world who hasn't struggled as a woman
Mm.
in her society.
Oh, no, no,
Yeah, not many,
not,
not many,
mm, not at all, you could say even, yeah.
There's a few matriarchal, for instance, American Indian tribes, where the
Mhm.
women have always been in charge, but
Africa also, some
yeah.
places, yeah.
So, but we know those are the exceptions to the rule. So I'm really telling these stories to connect.
Thank you. Yeah, I loved what you said about identifying with other women and connecting, right? That's the
Yeah.
only way you can talk about love, right? Spreading the message of love. And it's I was, you know that I was recently um the other side of the world,
Yeah.
and that um yeah, my message was love. I spoke in the Institute of Love and Religion and Culture in Oxford. So, and when I wrote my latest book, Virtual Diaspora, I gave a picture of me and my mother when I was a child in that book. Don't recall if I showed it to you. I'm going to give it to you. Um, but and now I'm thinking after listening to you when you talked about this connectivity, not just love, I'm thinking that why did I do that? Oh, because my mother passed 2 years ago. Uh, no, she passed 1 year prior to writing that book. And now I didn't realize that I was writing it for her. Then I realized, oh my God, what I wrote it so fast and I wrote it. It is just to overcome my sorrow that she's gone. And part of the reason I also gave that picture to show the world how much, you know, I felt the loss and what a terrible loss it is. As if it could be repaired only if I share my mother's picture with me in that book.
Right.
And
Right.
the concluding chapter also talks about, listening. It's a scholarly book, but suddenly there is a chapter I'm talking about my mother, how we used to listen to song together, that memory. So there you go. I mean, spontaneously you plunge into those pathways, right?
Right.
Because what is the point of writing if you cannot share it, right? Like you say, if you don't loved your poem Albatross, and although sad, I still loved your poem Crow, and I loved your poem The Sparrow. And there's few other poems. I love them for their names. Uh, we we have a little more time. When you talk about Mozart, what is the name of the Black Tanzer? Tanzer. It's very difficult. On section 4, you have a poem on uh
Scarlet Tanager.
yeah. Is that your favorite poem too?
It's one of my favorites for sure.
Yeah, if you can.
Yeah. So just a bit of historical background in the 19th century, there are many people originally from Czechoslovakia settled in a farming community in Iowa. And then in 1893, the composer Dvorak, who was teaching and living in New York City at the time, took a trip out there. And he spent the summer there in Spillville, Iowa, writing music among his fellow
Mhm.
Czechs. So that's why it's dated 1893. Scarlet Tanager. After too much New York City noise, off-key and birdless, Dvorak rode out to Iowa, that little Bohemia, to find himself a little scherzo. He'd already written his requiem, married his true love's sister. What he needed then was something molto vivace, something quirky, full of offbeats and cross rhythms, something American. Enter the Scarlet Tanager. No matter Thoreau disliked the bird's harsh notes, and his own wife said it sounded like a robin with a sore throat. From an oak's green canopy came the high, interrupting strain of a violin on fire. Next came the second violin, a viola, a cello, a gapped pentatonic composed by nature, a scarlet-plumed opus, folk-like but stranger, Next came an American quartet in F major.
Wonderful. Thank you. It's so beautifully written. I think I love all those imageries, from music that you took. It gave it an extra flavor, sort of you can hear the music. I think
Yeah, just the words themselves are so musical, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah. I also loved your poem, Blue. In the last section, there's a poem, Bluebird.
A bluebird.
And also you alternate between talking about themes of women, you alternate with again, but you come back. So I was wondering, why do you have any sequence in mind? You come back again to the theme of mother.
Mm-hmm.
So it is coming back.
Right.
It is
So there's
not
kind of
leaving
an
your
arc.
mind. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you we'll be running out of time soon. So I want to hear if you have anything um to tell me about it. Why I understand she's the predominant theme, right?
This bluebird actually speaks about both of my mothers, right? So
Yeah, that's also I was going to ask you. You talk both about both your mothers. Yeah.
yeah,
Not you're ignoring your adopted mother,
right, right. Who is also dead. She died in 2010.
Oh,
Um, so it's kind of talking about the two mothers who are not of this world anymore.
okay, yeah.
Yeah, and I also do mention my brother, and that was the brother that
Yeah,
I
you mentioned a
found.
couple of times. Yeah.
Yeah, he's the brother that I found when I found the sister in 1999.
Okay. Is he here like in America or somewhere else?
He was, unfortunately, my brother died of cancer in 2021. Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Let's give
Thank you.
this. Yeah. Uh-huh.
So for that reason, the poem feels a little extra special to me because
Yeah. We
I
can end.
quote him in the poem, and that was kind of his, he kind of like looked at life, straight out for what it was. There wasn't a lot of embellishment or metaphor for my brother Don.
You can give us a reading if you don't
Sure.
mind.
Bluebird.
Yeah.
Okay. I carved hollows into bodies of trees, nailed boxes on poles in sun-dazed fields. I appealed to the oldest witch, keeper of charms, to visit me in my dreams, whisper where the bluebird resides. My dead mother, the first, appeared instead. I pretended to sleep. She was happy I'd found her other daughter, her son, but there was no bluebird on her tongue or among the folds of her dress. Soon she disappeared, as is her habit, into the ether. If you ever catch that bird, said my newly discovered brother, it'll change color in its cage. To him, survival is happiness, as good as it gets. Years later, my other dead mother found me standing behind the house in LaGrange, where the bird used to nest. My mother took my hand, and there it was in my palm, a gleaming sapphire, warm to the touch and throbbing with what felt like desire. This mother couldn't stay, but will come back as she can. And the bird? I've learned its song as well as I know my sweet love's face. There it is now, tossing its notes out of the soggy field like so many blue stones.
I had to clap. Such a beautiful poem. Now, your other dead mother, is she your, okay, there's your other mother, right?
So yeah, the first, I call it the first dead mother is my birth mother, and then the mother who appears second in the poem is my adoptive mother.
Yeah.
Yeah,
She must have been so happy and proud of you.
she was
She
great.
did.
She was,
Yes, I can see that.
and
Yeah.
of course, I'm kind of giving a wink here to the bluebird of happiness, that we
Yeah,
talk about.
yeah, yeah. I'm very fond of Bluebird as well.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Colored blue, yeah. So thank you so much. I think we're almost
Yeah, thank you so much.
running out of time, and we'll resume it again. I had one last question. I had another question, but I don't know if I should skip it this time, which is a lot of, I wouldn't say religious, but you mentioned Christ many times.
Yeah.
And I already found the sparrow. That's where we started with sparrow, that philosophical connection, Saint Bede and Hindu philosophy. There are a lot of connections. So any last note on that?
Well, I was,
Goldfinch or I think,
yeah, Goldfinch mentions Christ too. Yeah. I mean, you can't help it when you're raised very Catholic. Only to find that I also come from, very Catholic family, including, my birth mother had been a nun before she left the convent and then had me. So
oh,
that kind of influence, I'm not a practicing Catholic, but I am a spiritual
automatically, yeah. No,
and
no,
yeah.
there are a lot of beautiful elements in Irish Catholicism. Although Joyce, I love Joyce, but
Yes,
although he critiques it, but he creates that aura,
yeah,
which is, there's a lot of beautiful elements in it, and,
absolutely.
yeah. So
No
I
doubt about
see,
it. Yeah.
and I was also drawn to your last name, Kearney. That's a place in Ireland. I'm very fond of, Irish music and the Celtic. So what is your connection with Celtic philosophy?
Well,
You
I'm
somewhere in the interview, you said in one of the interviews I watched. So,
yeah, my people are from both Northern Ireland and from Scotland.
wow.
Yeah,
Yeah, so it's all in your poetry. It's all there.
it
And
is.
in
Yeah,
and I felt it when we spoke. Okay.
good.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we
So
will
much.
continue maybe later the
Yes,
conversation. Yes.
such a joy. I thank you so much, Ashmita.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks to LexMedia.